Family Constellation and Spirituality. Good morrow, this is Chris speaking, Shores of Infinity, with a video about psychology and spirituality, this time family constellation. This is the first of a series where we'll talk about different types of psychology that can be helpful on the spiritual path. Well, I did talk a little bit about C.G. Jung's psychology already, but let's now delve into family constellation, which was founded by Bert Hellinger, a German or Austrian, I'm actually not sure, German or Austrian theologian. German, but it doesn't matter. It only matters so far as the roots of family constellation come from the US. But once Bert Hellinger heard of this early family and systems psychology, he developed a new system together with his experience as a theologian in Africa and the philosophy style or thinking style of phenomenology. Phenomenology is about experiencing and observing, not so much thinking theoretically, they're very practical. And thus the first rule of family constellation is acknowledge what is. Really have a look what is there, what is happening, what is now. Which has great similarities to Buddhism and Advaita. In our modern society, or societies and cultures, we're very used to live with lies and pretending. There's not so much honesty. So, to acknowledge what really is the first step. You cannot treat something as long as you're still deluded about the facts. And to help looking into what really is the case, Hellinger perfected the style of externalizing the internal parts and ongoings and blockages, traumas and so on. So you can externalize all the internal problems and parts and make them visible in front of you. You will have people taking the roles of your internal parts or of your family. For example, you have one substitute for your father, one substitute for your mother, and one substitute for yourself, just as an example. So you can even observe yourself, which I think is the biggest advantage of family constellation. So there are some forms of psychology where you externalize what's going on inside, like Gestalt therapy or family constellation, and there are others where you delve deeply inside, like radical allowing or focusing or quantum psychology, which I will talk about in other videos. But the great thing is that there is no kind of acting or role-playing going on. You enter the field of the patient's psychological system or the patient's family system or the patient's work environment or whatever. And the substitutes or representatives can really feel what is going on in the minds and hearts of the real persons they represent. All this is being led by a therapist called facilitator, and he or she makes sure that this is not falling apart into some kind of drama or chaos. So he or she has to hold the space so that a solution can come forward. And it's very important not to force any kind of solution or to push the patient. You can only treat as far as the patient allows it to be treated or is ready. So this type of psychology can be very, very effective if the therapist or facilitator is good. And herein lies the great problem. Because about 90% of all family constellation therapists are crap. Sorry to say that. Why is that so? All inventors of psychology styles have been either awake or enlightened. Most of them awake, very few enlightened. Enlightened, for example, C.G. Jung and Bert Hellinger. So it's very hard to copy them because their state of consciousness is not independent of their method. So you don't have to be enlightened to practice family constellation or C.G. Jung psychology, but it surely helps, and it would be good if you were at least awake. Nevertheless, you can still practice it successfully without being awake or enlightened if you're really open and if you regard it not as a fixed system but as a process of an inner journey. You, as a facilitator, as a therapist, have to go through an inner journey, and you have to develop this system, this method for you further and further. Bert Hellinger died in the age of 93, and he never stopped to develop his system of family constellation further and further. He always improved it until his last breath. And he expected his pupils to do the same, but most didn't. Most went to him for a few months or years, and then they copied it the way he taught it at that time and never changed a thing, and also tried to copy him, which was not possible. This led to drama queens, control freaks and authoritarians trying to copy Bert Hellinger's family constellation, and often then it didn't work. People got re-traumatized rather than healed. Instead of solutions or openings, they got whooped with more problems. Problems they didn't even know about that they had. Some idiots even started family constellation substyles, saying, now what we are doing has nothing to do with Hellinger. We're doing something completely different, but we're still calling it family constellation. Which made clear already that they didn't understand a thing about family constellation, because another principle of family constellation is to acknowledge and honor where something comes from. So if you learn something from someone else, you have to honor that someone else. Or your life energy, for example, or your life that you are alive comes from your parents. So you have to honor your parents just for that, independent of their style of raising you. Even if they beat you and mistreated and abused you, you still have to honor them for giving you your life, this life, independent of their personality. Which is a very, very difficult thing for many people on the spiritual path. Many people on the spiritual path hate their parents very, very much. And this can be an obstacle on your spiritual path. Because hate binds in a very uncomfortable way. You're still bound to your parents, but by hatred. You're not free because you hate your parents. And this can be a major reason for spiritual bypassing. So because most facilitators of family constellation didn't understand a word Bert Hellinger was saying, tried to copy him in some kind of absurd way, and also didn't go through this inner process that every psychologist has to go through. Meaning, hundreds and hundreds of hours of self-therapy. You cannot become a good psychotherapist without going through your own shit. It doesn't have to be the same shit than your patients go through, but you have to go through your own shit. Once you go through your own shit, you can support others in going through their stuff. A good family constellation is without drama, without pushing, and most of all, without the facilitator bringing any of his own topics and problems into the constellation. The constellation is only for the benefit of the patient. As soon as it becomes an ego trip for the facilitator, or of the facilitator, it can throw everything overboard. It has no value. Bert Hellinger realized that there are some sentences and some words that have more power than others, almost like a shamanic ritual. But the patient who utters these words really has to feel them. It's not enough just to say them. So many facilitators just let people say some sentences that they know from Hellinger's method and works or seminars, and then they think that's it. People say these words and everything is good. No, you have to really feel them, to live them, to experience them, to be fully immersed. Otherwise it doesn't work. Also, there's this crazy idea in family constellation, which is again similar to many spiritual methods, that if you do one or maybe two constellations, then this topic is resolved forever. It's not. It comes again and again like a spiral, like in spiral dynamics on different levels, and you have to resolve the same topic again and again and again until it's really dissolved. The same as spirituality. Things come again and again until they are resolved, and you cannot know in advance how long it takes. It might take 1 minute or 3 years. Who knows? So if you're looking to resolve some issues with family constellation, you have to really take care to find a therapist who's really good and who knows that his personality has nothing to do with your problem. Awake or not, he or she has to be able to use their intuition. Intuition is the most important skill that a family constellation therapist or facilitator has to have. It's not happening with the mind. It's not a mental therapy. The therapist has to be able to empty his or her mind and act from intuition. The early psychology styles, like Freud's psychoanalysis, was based on talking. Freud and Jung invented the talking therapy because 120 years ago no one talked about their stuff. It was all taboo. All the important stuff was taboo. Starting with sexuality and oppression of women. It was all taboo. So it was absolutely a revolution to talk about things. Now, much later, nowadays, this is not always necessary anymore. To the contrary, it can be detrimental. So in family constellation, there is not much talking going on, not much explaining, not much recounting your story. Again, there's a parallel to the spiritual path. Your story doesn't matter. It's how you experience life right now what matters. Not the story that you have told yourself and others hundreds of times. The good facilitator will not let you tell your story, but after a few sentences he or she will immediately grasp what is the essence of your problem and then move towards the constellation of externalizing it, looking at it as a phenomenon. And there's one more special thing about family constellation that you probably don't have in any other. And that is very unique to Bert Hellinger's style, and that many copycats were not able to copy. And this is that you can not only externalize your inner parts or your source family, your family of origin, or any other person that have to do with you, like your wife or your children, but you can also externalize and set up within the constellation supernatural powers like God or fate or death or life or happiness. And the better the facilitator is, the more it is possible to really represent those powers, those universal principles. And the more therapy the facilitator has gone through, and the more awake he or she is, the more intuition he has or she has access to, the more he or she will recognize if a representative will really represent who or what he or she is supposed to represent, and not just act or bring his own problems into it. Yeah? If representatives bring their own problems into the constellation, they have to be exchanged. Most of the time they have to be exchanged, otherwise you can raise the issue and then sometimes you can still keep the representative. One thing where you can really see if the facilitator is a good one is if you watch how the facilitator or the patient chooses the representatives. Choosing the representatives is a very conscious and honoring process. You have to ask the other person if he or she would like to and is ready to represent this or that. You cannot say, you will be my father and you will be God and you will be my sister. No. If someone does that, it's a very clear sign where the problem lies, but it has nothing to do with family constellation. This is how control freaks do it. And this might have been what Hellinger did in the beginning, but it doesn't matter because he developed it further. So I hope you can see here the amazing similarities between family constellation and the spiritual path, which in my view are there because the founder, Bert Hellinger, was such a spiritual person. But it is also a very effective method for some people. No method is for everyone, but for some it's a very effective method if the facilitator is a good one. And you have a chance about 1 in 10 that this is the case, unfortunately. Remember that the basic principle of family constellation is acknowledging what is. Once you acknowledge what is, things start to shift and change a little bit within the constellation, and it can come towards a solution or at least an opening up. For me, one of the major strengths of family constellation is that if a patient feels really stuck in something and cannot see how this is possible to resolve, it seems impossible, absolutely impossible to resolve. For example, a quarrel, family quarrel about an inheritance or something, yeah? Or troubles with the ex-wife or ex-husband seems to be impossible to resolve. It's just not possible. This is the perfect setup for family constellation because there are always possibilities. They're just not visible because of your blind spots. And here again we have this similarity to the spiritual path. Often things seem to be impossible. Or you think, my God, I've been on the path for years or decades already, and now I'm stuck. Yeah, that's only your perspective because of your blind spots. You need a larger perspective from another level, from another perspective. another view to get out of there. And then the journey continues, and it's all a journey. Family constellation is an internal journey. And the spiritual path is also an internal journey. It's not about achieving a state. Enlightenment is not a state. It's not a state of consciousness. Enlightenment is a dynamic of letting go. Of letting go what shackles you, what holds you down, what limits you. Enlightenment is a path to freedom, your individual path to freedom. And some psychological tools like family constellation may help you to get there sometimes. Thanks for watching and listening. Thank you for joining me as a patron. Leave your comments below and see you soon.